outcomes in our community.
I call the honourable member Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. New Zealand First believes in local democracy and in fully empowered local government, unlike the current government. We say local alcohol policies must be compulsory, and that's the subject I wish to address in this speech. The new Section 75 would provide that territorial local authorities develop local alcohol policies for their districts and require that the development process for a draft has, first of all, consultation with police, inspectors and medical officers of health. It also would require the draft policy developed in this way to go through the special consultative procedure set out in the Local Government Act so that the public can have their say too. And Mr Chairman, New Zealand First believes it's extremely important that the public buy-in should be provided for, because if the public doesn't support the regime for alcohol in their district, then it's going to be widely compromised, and that's very bad. It's also very important that a policy in an area and government legislation should enable local attitudes to be reflected and local needs to be met, because there are many and various districts and cities in this country which have widely different requirements and people with quite different attitudes, and they should be reflected. There should be provision for that. These policies must, under the bill as presented, take into account a range of considerations, such as the district plan itself, with which the policies would obviously have to be consistent, the number of liquor licences in the district, their opening hours and locations, also local alcohol bylaws, and most importantly, I think, tourism considerations and public health considerations. For those reasons, Mr Chairman, it is therefore important that all territorial local authorities should have a local alcohol policy, so that the residents of the district can have a real and substantial input into local alcohol policy making. For that reason, the local alcohol policies must be mandatory. It must be mandatory for each and every authority in this country to have such a policy. I simply can't understand the logic behind simply empowering local authorities to do so. That lets some of them off the hook, and none of them should be let off the hook. It's an important matter for local communities and local authorities. Each and every one of them must have one, and this legislation should make it mandatory. And, Mr Chairman, it wouldn't create any great imposition upon them to do so. It's fundamental to the welfare of their communities. It wouldn't require a huge amount of money. They do a lot of this stuff already, so why not make it mandatory? I can't see any reason why not. And, Mr Chairman, there are many competing interests in alcohol policy making, and a balance between commercial interests, community interests, public health and policing concerns will vary from one district to another, and that balance must be achieved on a local basis. That can only happen if there are mandatory requirements for these things to happen. Some districts have significant holiday locations, such as Mount Maunganui, Wanaka and Queenstown, where there are special considerations because of the sheer scale of visitors to those places to celebrate occasions such as New Year's Eve. The government, it seems to me, has apparently bowed to commercial interests and not making the adoption of local alcohol policies compulsory. Community concerns are therefore, I think, being sidelined in favour of commercial interests because of this, and the balance that I spoke of will not be achievable unless the requirement is mandatory for these policies to be produced. I would like to, in closing, refer to SOP number 80 in the name of Kevin Haig, which replaces in section 75(1) the word may with must. And that's all it takes, Mr Chairman, to do what I'm asking for. And in fact, if Mr Hague had not put this SOP in, then New Zealand First would certainly have done so. He also proposes a number of consequential amendments to that, but I'd like to particularly, Mr Chairman, refer to...
I call the honourable member Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'd like to particularly refer to one of the other amendments he proposes in clause 84.2 to delete paragraph C, and that relates to abandoning a policy which has already been developed. And that seems to me to be utterly unbelievable, that legislation should actually empower that to happen. Similarly, in clause 86A, there would be a power to discontinue the development of a policy. To me, Mr Chairman, that's a breach of trust between the local authority and the community which it represents. How can you go through all these consultative... how can the local authority go through all of these consultative procedures and then simply decide to give up midstream? As I said, I think that's a breach of trust and is a most inappropriate provision and should be deleted, as Mr Hague has proposed. Similarly, in clause 91, we see that another area in which a similar deletion is required, and Mr Hague has proposed to replace subclause 1 with the words "a territorial authority may, by using the special consultative procedure, revoke its local alcohol policy and adopt another in its place," which excludes the possibility of simply revoking and not providing another one in its place. So it's very important that those provisions be adopted as well for all the reasons I've said. So, Mr Chairman, in conclusion, New Zealand First believes very much in local democracy and that every local council must use that principle of local democracy to have a local alcohol policy fully consultative, reflecting local needs and reflecting local attitudes. So I would commend to the House the adoption of Mr Hague's SOP number 80 to carry out those particular objectives which we think are so important.
I call the honourable member